updated.
Democrats want Republicans dead.
Where I could stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody and I wouldn't lose any voters, okay?
The women with the least likelihood of getting pregnant are the ones most worried about having abortions.
On January 6th of 2021, you had tens of thousands of people peacefully protesting.
So, it's not a right-wing conspiracy theory. It's not QAnon. It's real.
My guest today on the podcast, you are going to love this one, folks. It's Stephen Fish, and he has a phenomenal new book that I strongly encourage you to take a look at. It's called Comeback: Routing Trumpism, Reclaiming the Nation, and Restoring Democracy's Edge. And Stephen talks about something that I have known from experience and felt in race after race after race across this country, and seen in the way that successful battles against authoritarians here and abroad can be waged. And that is that dominance in politics matters. A lot of our Democratic friends want to sing Kumbaya and argue about policy. We know that really doesn't work. Stephen's going to talk today about this book and tell us a little bit about how we can win, not only this year, but as we go forward in facing up against authoritarians, bullies, and tough guys around the world. So, Steve, thank you so much for joining us on the Enemies List today. Tell us about how you came to write the book Comeback, and talk to folks about what the central predicate of the work is.
Well, Rick, thanks so much for having me on. You know, I'm a comparative political scientist, and I study, democracy and authoritarianism. And what I've really focused on for a long time is how people can get their freedom and keep it if they do. And as I looked around the world, and I'm sure you've done this as well, I started to see a pattern emerging. Democracy's been under threat now for, the better part of a decade and a half or so around the world. And what seemed to be making the difference was that all these countries where democracy was coming under threat were not united by some economic crisis or, some big cultural backlash. Right. In fact, in many of these countries, the economies were doing great. Public attitudes have been liberalizing. But it seemed like it was a matter of leadership. And what you saw from India's Narendra Modi to Donald Trump to Vladimir Putin to Viktor Orban in Hungary was that this breed of demagogue was very good at showing people that they were in charge. They were the guys who really kind of had the dominance edge over everybody else, and they could get things done. And whether you like their policies or not, many people actually started feeling like, well, these are the tough guys who can actually defend us. Whether you agree with their policies or not, they're the ones who actually can get things done. And very often around the world, liberals actually had completely lost track of the need to, own their opponents. What's more, they oftentimes had dropped the flag and left the flag in the hands of these ethno-national creepy crawlers, and they weren't telling their own glorious, liberal, inclusive, anti-ethno-national story. Then I look at the United States, and it seemed like the same thing was going on here. What's more, the stories that liberals tell ourselves about how we got Trump and how to get rid of him just didn't seem to wash. There's a story out there about the poor, straightened, white working man, falling into his cups on his way to an early grave due to escalating insecurity, job satisfaction, and so on. But if you look at the data, going back to the 1970s, I could not find evidence of this in the data. In fact, working class people in this country, you could always hope for better, but have done reasonably well. Our economy's done better overall than most of the other rich countries. What's more, you do not see escalating bigotry and intolerance. Exactly the opposite has happened. So I started again turning to the question of leadership. And what I saw in Trump was the same thing I see in Orban and Putin and Modi, which is a guy not who has especially popular policies or philosophies, but a guy who has this reputation of being able to own his opponents.
This is part of that illusion of white working class economic anxiety that was used as a bludgeon to work the refs in the media and in the traditional Republican Party, came to us in the form initially of J.D. Vance in Hillbilly Elegy.
That's right.
And millions of people read that book. I read that book. I thought it was elegantly written. I thought it was well done. But J.D. Vance, interestingly enough, has abandoned all the predicates that he claimed were there and become a raving ethno-nationalist who's now about owning the libs, punishing the enemies of Trump and Trumpism. And so that economic anxiety lie about globalization and about the changes in the job market, it turned out it really was the first big lie before Trump's big lie about losing the election. This idea that and I wrote about this in my first book, that economic anxiety was what they were unwillingly becoming these monstrous characters because of economic anxiety wasn't true. They wanted the tough guy to tell them it's okay. It's okay to be ugly. It's okay to be racially motivated. It's okay to be loud. It's okay to be obnoxious. It's okay to use violence. They really were looking for that a long time before J.D. Vance gave them a sort of paper excuse for it.
That's absolutely right. And J.D. Vance's book is really the ultimate con. You know, he played this line. Mm-hmm. Liberals, frankly, a lot of people on the left love this book.
Sure.
Wow, this is, this guy from Appalachia, has really told this story we're talking about. But it was totally a con. And this was his way of becoming a national figure and then turning on it. And ultimately, he had the last laugh. He became exactly the kind of monster you said, and was elected to the United States Senate. So it should be telling to us that we actually fell for that con. Many people on the left did, and this is what we get.
Well, and when you look at the depth of, I think, liberal anxiety about, because look, there has been a divide in the country in the last 30 years. It's more defined by educational attainment than by almost any other factor. And as people looked at a J.D. Vance, they said, oh, he's from the meritocracy. He's a guy that, he went to an Ivy. He's made it out of this hellscape that he was born into. And so it became more convincing, I think, to a lot of people. And I also think it became convincing to Democrats in a way because, as I've observed for many, many years, a lot of my Democratic friends go into a campaign and they say, we're going to win over voters by presenting them with a list of policy proposals. And these policy proposals are going to make their lives better, and they're going to improve their day-to-day existence, and they're going to feel good about themselves. And I can tell you, as an ex-Republican who spent many, many, many decades of my life sitting in focus groups, no one, left or right, ever buys any of that shit. One of my favorite lines, and I've used it a million times since then, was in a focus group in Michigan back in pre-Trump, back in 2014, and a Democratic union should have been a perfect Democratic candidate or a perfect Democratic voter. He said, they keep saying shit like, I'm going to become a holistic solar panel installer. It's bullshit. I'm never going to believe it. And they should stop it. It's insulting to me. I want to work on the line. But Democrats were like, no, your car job, your energy job, this, that, it's going to be replaced, and you're going to feel better about yourself because not only are you putting up solar panels or windmills or whatever else it is, and maybe those things are perfectly virtuous, you're going to feel better. It's going to make you a better person. And these guys just don't. But they don't buy it. They don't believe it. So when they see a Trump, when they see a Vance, when they see a DeSantis, when they see all these characters who are like, yeah, I'm going to be your extended middle finger. I'm going to be the guy that tells those elites that are promising you that you don't get to work in a union job in an auto factory or a parts plant anymore. You get to become a windmill installer. You get to learn to code or whatever the thing is. They go to that because they are attracted to the transgressiveness of the strength and the assertion of dominance.
There's no doubt about that. And in fact, if you talk to these folks, as you've done for sure and studied this for many years, they will not tell you what so many Democrats think they will. What Democrats oftentimes think is these folks are going to tell you, back in the day, the Democrats used to really mind my wages and working conditions,
Right.
and they really stuck up for my old man's trade unions. And since they abandoned that for neoliberalism, starting with Clinton or something like that, I'm going to turn to Trump. That makes no sense logically. You wouldn't turn to the guy who is even more mindless of your economic interests. Second of all, that's not what they're going to tell you. If you belly up to the bar and talk to some working class Trump people, they won't tell you what I just said. They'll tell you basically that the Democrats are wimps, weak patriots who, look down on people like them and think that they're bigots. And they'll tell you, we're socialists as well. They don't want more of those hardcore lefty policies that we offer them with this very condescending tone. We basically tell them, look, if you don't understand that the American dream is dying for you and that you need nothing more than a government-provided break, well, just wait till you get old and the Republicans won't cover your pre-existing conditions. That's the attitude we have brought to this. If you go back to FDR and JFK and LBJ, these guys who actually really presented highly progressive programs to people, they never adopted that tone. First of all, they wrapped all their progressive policies in this grand national vision of America showing the world what we're made of. So there was this kind of liberal nationalism. Second of all, they told people, you earned this with your hard-earned tax money. And then they appealed to our better natures. They said, let's help the poor folks while we're at it. The Democrats these days do none of that. We have this condescending message to the working class, who everybody in the working class knows we kind of think that their bigotry is holding back from voting for us. And we don't package our policies in this big convincing narrative. And to them, that feels condescending. It doesn't feel like the kind of policies they want. Americans can embrace progressive policies, but you do it the way Bill Clinton did. You say, this is a way of getting people back to work. We're all about self-reliance and self-help in this country. And Clinton, like FDR and JFK and LBJ, were able to sell these progressive policies to people, packaging them that way. With Obama and with Biden, we've really lost track of that, certainly with Hillary Clinton as well.
And one thing I think that it's important to recognize is a lot of the people that have been drawn to Trump, they are not drawn to the traditional Republican message of limited government, minimal regulation, small government, constitutional, fealty. They're not drawn to that. They like the big government angle of it. This is, traditionally, I like to always, joke to my Republican friends, look, guys, I know you hate socialism, and I'm not a huge fan of its normal outcomes in a lot of places, but we've had a lot of just the tip socialism in America for a very long time. And the Republican voters, at the peak irony ever, the sign of keep your hands off my Social Security at a Republican rally, is just like, of course. Right. Yes, because of communism. But I want to get to a point that you touched on that means a lot to me, because I am a words and pictures guy. I am a guy who understands iconography and symbolism and how it fits into the human psyche of American voters. And one of the things that has been, in my mind, an absolute catastrophic failure mode of the Democrats for a very long time is they have abandoned the signifiers of America, the flag, all the things that emotionally connect not just with Republican voters, but with with the vast majority of their own voters out in the country. The vast majority of Americans, Democrat or Republican, they don't look at the flag as a symbol of shame. They don't look at America's history as 100%, anathema. They don't look at our flawed beginning as a disqualifier for continued improvement or future greatness. Talk to us a little bit about the way that the Republicans have kidnapped and adopted and appropriated a lot of the symbols that make so much of a difference in American political life.
Well, I think the way they've appropriated it is just by virtue of the fact that the Democrats have allowed them to do this.
Correct.
Look, both parties, the Republicans have always, tried to portray themselves as the stronger patriots, but the Democrats used to do that too. But the Democrats have gotten so squeamish about nationalism.
Right.
And on the far left, people really don't oftentimes think that the United States is kind of worthy of loyalty and pride because of all our past injustices.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the fact is, Biden and company are not woke extremists. They're great patriots themselves.
Sure.
But they don't distance themselves very strongly from these people on the far left and grab the flag themselves. Everybody knows Biden is very patriotic.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact is he still leaves the flag in the hands of the Republicans. Consequently, you've got a party, the Republican Party, which has abandoned what I call in the book the 4 pillars of Americanism. The first is democracy. You can't call yourself a patriotic American or a conservative in this country that was founded for the purpose of self-government if you're fighting democracy. Number two is our demographic dynamism. That is a country of immigrants whose greatness and cultural and economic greatness is ensured by new arrivals. Reagan pounded away at this as he justified some very liberal immigration policies.
Sure.
Right? Number 3 is economic freedom. The Republicans are no longer a party of market fundamentalism. This is not Reagan and McCain. What they advocate is crony capitalism, the Putin side.
It's a kakistocracy. It's Putinism.
Absolutely, where politicians leverage their public office for private gain. And number 4 is defense of our democratic allies against their and our sworn enemies. The Republicans side with our greatest sworn enemies. That's Putin.
Mm-hmm.
Trump is on Putin's side at every step. Now, the problem
100%.
is the Democrats do not make our own nationalist case. They don't really, we've never taken advantage of Trump's fealty to Putin. We've never really cast our battle for democracy in these grand national terms. This is not a mistake that FDR or JFK would have made. In fact, the fact they didn't make it is the reason why the Republicans could never capture the flag from these guys. And the reason why they were able to push through every progressive program that liberals are now fighting a rearguard action to defend, because they always cast them as part of this grand national project to show America, to show the world what America and democracy were made of. The Democrats have completely lost track of that. Some of the most effective ads going back to 2020 were Lincoln Project ads. Actually showed Biden on an aircraft carrier, the flags, the whole patriotism thing. Those ads didn't just resonate with conservatives. Those ads resonated with the moderate left and the center and true conservatives and the MAGA folks. And, I really think that our party has to learn from that and kind of, do that ourselves. We should not have to rely on ex-Republicans like you, but keep up the good work. But still, we shouldn't have to rely on you for that. That should come naturally to us. And to the extent that it doesn't, we better learn it.
There were a few ads that we did in that regard in 2020 that just blew the doors off when people tested them. And the one ad you're talking about, it was the Biden campaign. He had won the nomination and they were sucking wind. They were exhausted. They had no money in the bank. And, one of those friend of a friend things, like anything you guys can do to raise positives would be great. And so we came back, and this ad, folks, it's, Joe Biden, on an aircraft carrier. Joe Biden saluting troops as he walks by a line of uniformed soldiers. Yep. Joe Biden, flags, eagles. I mean, it had everything except a Trans Am jump in the Grand Canyon. It had everything but monster trucks. And a Democratic friend who was a pretty senior person in the Biden effort called me and goes, I would never have thought to do the ad that way. And I was like, I know. You would make a Benetton ad. You would make an ad with every single conceivable demographic of people you could think of. You'd shove them all into one ad. You'd talk about policy, and then you'd think, why doesn't this move numbers? Because Americans want to feel that their candidates love the country they seek to lead.
Absolutely, and everybody everywhere does, Rick. This is not even just an American thing.
Right. Correct. Correct.
Love the country. Everybody wants to feel proud of it and grateful for it, and the vast majority of Americans do. And if you can't be the party that shows folks that you love the country better than your opponents do, we know from comparative political science, we know from common sense, you're always going to start any election campaign with a big disadvantage.
Yep. My son, Andrew, did a campaign a couple years ago in Europe, again, with a center-left candidate against a Steve Bannon selected right-wing cuckoo. And it's a conservative country where they did this. And the campaign they built out was basically to say, why are you tearing down our greatness? Why are you insulting our country? Why don't you have pride in our nation? And that really worked, to flip the script, because the idea of nationalism and pride are very tightly linked in people's minds. And if you let authoritarian nationalism take the ball and run with it, they'll do it every time.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And look, this does not mean buying into their brand of nationalism. It's exactly the opposite. It's anti-ethno-nationalism. It's what I call whole country nationalism. It's aggressively inclusive, but you attack them for betraying these pillars of Americanism, right? That's got to, and attack them for betraying American culture and traditions and values, not just for being meanies, not just for being unkind, not for being offensive, right? That's a defensive crouch, and constantly being offended by the other guys. You can't play offense from that crouch. You've got to offend them. And too many Democrats don't understand the need to be offensive. That's the only way to be on the offensive. And that's what we should be doing to Trump, not recoiling in umbrage every time the guy says something really obnoxious.
Right. There is a limited amount of energy voters can devote to saying, oh, God, look, he just insulted X demographic group or Y, belief system. There is some of it where you have to assert a position back at him that isn't passive, that isn't policy driven, that is emotional. And, it's an old lesson I learned from Lee Atwater back in my beginnings in the darkness of time, which was when you've got a dog fight, people want to see that your dog has some fight in it. They want to see that the dog is going to go in there and compete. And there is a certain sense that you can substitute policy or intentionality or just feeling a sense of outrage about, Trump's behavior for an aggressive campaign. And look, we've got a guy now with 34 felony charges against him. 34 felony convictions.
Convictions. You're absolutely right about that.
And the idea, what do you think about this idea that's sort of taking hold in the Democratic movement that's like, well, we'll just let that go. People know. We're just going to move on to policy.
No, look, the first thing I saw, Biden's response, the first text I got was, did you see that Trump just got convicted of 34 felony counts, and he's raising money off of it?
Right.
He's already raised $35 million. We don't want to be out fundraised by Donald Trump. This was, again, the weakest, wimpiest possible defensive posture. Yeah. Right? Yeah. It was just, it's like after the Mueller investigation, right? And after, which did not disprove Trump's fealty to Putin, the Democrats just let it drop. We should be on the attack, ridiculing, pointing out that our upstanding, patriotic guy who would never be convicted of anything. Whatever Hunter Biden's problems, they're pretty petty, and they're not Joe Biden's problems.
And he's not running for president.
He's not running for president. Joe Biden is an upstanding, patriotic American. Trump is a miscreant who's probably going to be, if justice is done, in prison soon. Rather than using that and ridiculing Trump, what the Democrats are doing, again, is saying, you see how awful he is, and trying to raise funds off of that. Again, doing the low dominance thing, shining the spotlight on one's opponent, and hoping that people will realize just how awful he is. Being offended, being defensive. If you go back to 2016 and Hillary Clinton's campaign, which is what gave Donald Trump to begin with, her stance was always umbrage. It was always being offended. To get back to your earlier point, it was always saying, Latinos, did you just hear what he said about you? He called, illegal, or she wouldn't say that, she'd say undocumented, migrants, rapists. Isn't that horrible? He offends African Americans and Muslim Americans and women and so on. Her whole tactic was try to get people as offended as she was. The problem is a lot of these people just aren't easily offended. If you're talking about immigrants, from developing countries. They come from oftentimes from hardscrabble backgrounds.
Absolutely.
Politicians talk shit all the time, and you can't expect to win just by trying to get them offended. The problem is Hillary never offended Trump, and that's what we were all waiting for. And that people wanted that display of dominance. Hillary Clinton's not a weak person, but she seemed so weak compared to Trump because she could never get over her umbrage, rather than turning him into the object of ridicule that he was manifestly made to be. And I want to get back to another point you raised.
Sure.
Donald Trump, unlike Narendra Modi or let's say Erdogan in Turkey, does a singularly bad job of glorifying America. He's very bad at this. This should be a piece of cake for us to seize the flag from this guy in this respect. And if you can't do it with Donald Trump, how off your patriotism game do you have to be? You know, and what I say in the book, and I devote a whole section of the book to this, is telling our own pro-democratic, what I call a national democratic narrative that can fight back against Trump and betray his treason of the United States. He is a traitor to all pillars of Americanism. In fact, a traitor to the United States, probably in the strict sense as well. God knows what Putin got from Trump in the way of national secrets. The man's interested in monetizing everything he can.
You know, the idea of treason as the ultimate betrayal of any patriotic value is something that I think we need as a message to reconnect for a lot of voters, because right now, successfully on the part of the Trump's people, he's said, you know, you're just disagreeing with me because you dislike me. You calling me a traitor because you dislike me. And, you know, the guy is objectively a traitor. He is objectively un-American. He is objectively a criminal. He is objectively a danger to the future of this country. And you mentioned, like, immigrants don't always understand the sort of, oh, aren't you put upon argument that was made by Hillary a lot, and to some degree gets made by Democratic, you know, folks even now. My plea to Democrats, especially because they worry now about losing Hispanic men, they worry about African American men, is to look to the things Stephen is saying in this book, folks, because those voter groups both come with a very strongly patriarchal cultural load, and they are looking for the tough guy. Why do they like him? They like him because he's an asshole. They like him because he swaggers. They like him because he says, all my enemies. They like that. And you will not, Democrats, I promise you, with every fiber of my being, I promise you, if I lined every single one of those groups up, if I put 100 focus groups of Hispanic men and 100 focus groups of African American men, not one of your promises to do policy things for them will sell. Not one. Trump will go to a UFC match and get more juice out of it than you will by saying, oh, we're going to retrain you to become a blah, 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 blah. It won't work. This is emotion. It's emotion.
It's always emotion. And the Democrats think it's reason. It's about offering another ad buy on what we're going to do for their prices of Viagra and Valium. Like, people don't vote on those things. People vote for who they think is going to be the best and the strongest leader. The fact is oftentimes, you know, Democrats are completely baffled now why we are losing even Hispanic men, why we're losing a lot of first-generation Americans. And, you know, I can't tell you how many students I've got here at Liberal Berkeley whose parents are first-generation Americans, and they're all in for Trump. And when I ask them about it, the basic message I get is the following. And you can get this just going down to a bar and having a beer with some of these guys, which is basically the Republican message is, okay, you're here. You gave up everything to get here. You did the right thing. You won the lottery. Now go start a business, get rich, do whatever you want.
Right.
Here you are. And the Democrats say, well, that's not a very warm welcome. But what did they get from us? What they get from us oftentimes is condolences. Are you sure you really made the right decision by giving everything up to come to this country that's saturated with anti-immigrant sentiment and white supremacy? The fact is, Americans are more pro-immigrant than we've been at any time in our history.
That's right.
And, it's pro-legal immigration. Nowhere in the world are people happy about illegal immigration. And the Democrats, unfortunately, just parenthetically, very often fail to make the distinction between legal and illegal immigration, right? And this is what gives Trump's an advantage. Trump's an advantage even with this pro-immigrant public. So the Democrats have to actually make a point of, making a distinction between the two.
It's so true. It's so true. Well,
yeah. And what's more, Rick, let me just follow up on another point you make. Look, our approach to Trump should not be, look at how awful this guy is. Look at how mean this. We should ignore Trump, except to just ridicule him. This should be about us, our guy, our way of doing things, our patriotism, the shining light on Trump and hoping against hope that people will finally wake up and realize how awful this guy is a losing strategy. We've been doing that since 2016, and it hasn't moved the needle. In fact, it's built him up.
Well, it's funny because I get a lot of grief from some Democratic media consultants and from some professional, we must test every ad and we must make sure that the focus group approves of every word and image type people, because we make ads that get in Trump's face, that get in his head, that get in his shit. And people are like, why do you do that? Is that just liberal? No, I don't care about who else sees it. It goes on TV in Mar-a-Lago to mess with him, because the more he behaves like Trump, the more my argument is made to the American people. The more he behaves like Trump, the more every pro-democracy person in this country can say, yeah, no, that guy's weak. He's weak because he can't control himself. He can't maintain himself. This is why, in this window that we're recording this, it's been about a week now since the verdict, and there has been a profound shift in the early numbers. We're going to see more of it, I think, because it makes Trump not the strong man for once. Now he's in the hands of the system because he was weak. He was sleeping in court. He was out of emotional control every day. And the more you can show Trump in that frame, the better off we are as a country. So
absolutely.
So
absolutely.
Stephen, I got one more question for you, and I wanted to get your feelings on this. As we go into July, we're going to have our first debate. If you're Joe Biden, how do you frame your performance in that debate against Donald Trump?
You attack Trump. You ridicule Trump. And that's about all the attention you pay to Trump. Otherwise, it's all about you, Joe. You're the man. Quit making it a referendum on Trump, right? That just builds him up. To the extent you deal with him at all, he should just be an object of ridicule. Biden needs to make his case. Another aspect of what I call low dominance messaging is this squeamishness about crowing about your own accomplishments.
Oh, God. Kills me.
The Democrats seem to think that if you really step out and hammer into people's heads all the great things that have happened in this country due to our party, due to our policies, somehow that's like insensitive to those who still suffer. We saw this in the Obama administration's messaging. He did great things for the country, but and I've got a chapter in the book on this, his messaging team kept saying, oh, but Mr. President, our polling shows that not everybody's feeling the benefits yet. So you can't step out and say America's back and all these great things you're doing. So Obama's messaging, it was always great during election campaigns because it was just him front and center telling his story. That was great. But while he was in office, he was constantly bridled by these advisors. So consequently, his messaging was always, and this is from a guy that saved us from a global depression and then gave us health care, and whose second term was an unequivocal economic success, was always, well, things are better than they used to be, but they're not as good as they should be. I'm trying my best, and I know a lot of you guys are still suffering, but still, it's better than if they were in power. That doesn't work. Right?
It's too passive. It's just too passive.
What Trump did and what Bill Clinton did was they always let you know the great things they were bringing on their watch. In Trump's case, it was oftentimes a lot of bullshit. And if you look at the numbers on economic confidence, you look at the numbers on management of the presidential management of the economy, what you see is they were very high under Bill Clinton and high under Donald Trump, but much lower under Biden and Obama. That has no relationship to empirical reality. Biden's economy is every bit as good as Trump's or better right now. The difference is Clinton and Raging Cajun Jimmy Carville, and then of course Trump and his whole message. They always let you know how well things were going.
Sure.
Promises kept, right? The fact is that these guys were always telling you they were delivering. Now, recently, out of Biden, we've seen a little hint that he might be kind of getting this. He gave a speech to African-American leaders the other day that I found is like a little ray of hope. He kept intoning the great things he had brought them and the whole country. And after each promise, after each kind of exposition of the good things he'd done, he said, promises made, promises kept. This reminded me of a speech that I use in the book where John Kennedy said very much the same thing. In his speeches, he was always driving home to you what he'd promised and what he'd delivered. And oftentimes, his administration, due to Republican intransigence, wasn't able to deliver that much. But whatever he was able to deliver, he actually stepped out and told you about. Biden needs to do that without any embarrassment over whether the polls show that people are feeling the benefits.
Right.
You need leaders to tell people that you are doing well. People believe what their leaders tell them. Trump told them, Clinton told them, Biden, not so much.
So
no good things you're doing.
I could not agree more. I'll tell you one last story, then I've got to wrap up for this. And I really appreciate you coming on the show today. And I want to keep in touch, Steve, because your book, and folks, I want to be really clear. I want you to go out. It's a easy book to internalize, and it will give you some lessons that I think are so important. It's called Comeback: Routing Trumpism, Reclaiming the Nation, and Restoring Democracy's Edge by Stephen Fish. But what you were just saying is so true, because another one of our ad-making stories, when the president passed the infrastructure bill, who was the first organization with an ad about the infrastructure bill up on TV in Washington and other places? It was not the DNC. It was not the president's campaign. It was nobody else except the Lincoln Project. We went out there and said, here's what we just did. It's amazing. This is the good stuff. And yet there's still this disconnect, like, oh, well, it's not perfect. And I talked to somebody at the White House at the time who said, well, we don't want to piss off all the people who didn't get all the climate stuff they wanted in the bill. Right. I'm like, who do you think those people are going to vote for in November? Who do you think they're going to vote for? They're not switching to Donald Trump because they didn't get every climate thing in their bill in the end. But Stephen, once again, thank you, my friend, for coming on the show today. Folks, Comeback is a great book. I strongly recommend it wherever fine books are sold. And I will see you guys again on the next episode.